So we're going to click on Bevel and Emboss. And right here on the left of your screen is a preview of where I'm going to end up. So you can see all those settings of the final hot word when we're all done with this bevel effect. So we're just going to click on Bevel and Emboss, and we're going to want to do an inner bevel. And when we do a soft or a smooth, it kind of gives it a little bit of a dated look. Let's see if I can't make that more depth so you can see. So you can see how it softens it, but it gives it kind of this low resolution look. So that's why I'm going with chisel hard with this one, because I want a really sharp version of this. So we can have this huge depth of the effect, or we can have it down to almost 0. Or in this case, we want a little bit of depth because 0 would be nothing. So let's do 22%. And we want to make sure our size is really big, because if we don't have much of a size, you're not going to see much of the bevel effect. And then lastly, soften. We want to reduce that almost to pretty low, because if we were to have this nice soft look, it gives it that dated gradient look. But if you reduce the softness, it gives it that hard 3D block look to it as well. We could also change the angle of the light coming in. So you see it was kind of this upper 51 degrees to the upper right. But when we change it, it changes the way the lighting hits. And we want the lighting, I guess, to be on the top, shining down on the hamburger. So let's kind of have our angle be somewhere around 153. Doesn't have to be exact. This is how you think it'll look good. So we're going to need to change the color on this. We're not going to leave it gray. So when you think of hot, what color do you think of the most? I think of bright, vivid red. So I'm just selecting a color of red I think would work really good. Maybe even have a little orange, kind of like a flame or a fire. But I want to have it dark enough where I can overlay some flames and some effects on it and it still be good. So let's bring a little bit more red into there, just like that. So now when we go back to our bevel and emboss, we can see how the effects are going to be. So you just notice how it adds a little bit of 3D pop to it, but it's not overdone. It's just a really subtle effect. You can even increase the depth a little bit to bring out more of the shadow. So let's do that here. Let's add a little more depth than what I had here before, just to really make it shown. And we probably want to eventually have a drop shadow on here, and we're going to have to fine tune that after we get all of our effects on there. So we're just putting in a light, generic drop shadow for now. That will probably end up changing. So let's say we want to save all this and do the same thing to Juicy. We could do the same effects to Juicy, or we could save it as a layer style and save a lot of time. So we're going to create this as a new style. We're going to call this hot. Click on OK. So now all I have to do is select Juicy. We don't need that anymore. We can select Juicy, apply the same layer style. So let's make sure I have my styles up. And I have all these styles I have saved, and this one should be hot right here. Just like that, I got the second one already completed. But we don't want to have it red, so let's go ahead and double click and change it. Double click our layer styles, and let's get that color overlay. Let's bring out, so when you think about Juicy, the reason this hamburger is so juicy is they use fresh vegetables. So it's all about using organic lettuce and tomato. So let's really bring out the green in the lettuce. So let's go ahead and click on a green to get started. We want something even more green than that. So let's do it manually. Bring out some real juicy lime green. Thinking lime green, but bright and vibrant. We don't want to be too light. We don't want to be too dark. We want to be just right. And we could probably see our drop shadow a little bit better on this one, so we can go ahead and change our drop shadow. We can make it a bit stronger. So now you can kind of see that overlapping shadow effect from the drop shadow. So now we have the word and now that we have our effects on hot and juicy, we're going to be able to figure out what to do with and. So let's make this white to contrast against the very sharp colors of red and green. So we need white to balance those two colors. So let's also do a very, very strong drop shadow on this so that it can really stand on its own. We can also apply the same effect too. So we have our little layer styles here. We need to kind of manipulate this one though and make it white, and maybe make the bevel not as strong. We just want to have a little bit. So just reducing the depth just a little bit. We don't want everything to be beveled because then it gets a little bit too busy. So let's make and a little bit bigger without hurting the readability of our other type. So hot and juicy, everything is readable. There's nothing that's blocked too much. We have just enough spacing to fit that and in there. So let's go ahead and save this. I'm pretty happy with kind of how the type and the basic blocking is going. And we can even size up. A lot of times I like to do a visibility test. So that means I zoom out and kind of see how the ad is coming together at a distance. So this really helps me out with basic blocking. Do I feel like anything needs to be shifted around or anything made bigger or smaller? So in this case, I think the headline could even afford to come down a little bit over the hamburger. So just to bring those elements together more, so I'm just using my arrow keys and lining that up. That also gives us a little bit more margin at the top, a little nice professional breathing room. It's nice to have that. We could even make this just a tiny bit smaller, and everything is still vector and can be scaled up without reducing the quality. So we need to do something with this hot and juicy burger now. We've already picked out a typeface. That's kind of our main typeface. Let's kind of stick with it. Let's do our amboy, and let's make that slightly smaller. And we can add kind of our drop shadow to make sure it stands out. And also when it comes to URLs, when you have all caps on URLs, that's okay. But this is a very long multiple word URL, and it's easy for people to remember URLs if you were to help the viewer isolate the URL by highlighting one particular word so it reads more natural. So instead of hot juicy burger reading as one word, all we have to do is change the color, just adapting some of this lime green. And so now it breaks up the words. And so now it reads as 3 separate words instead of one together word. So it just kind of helps a little bit with viewer readability. Every once in a while, toggle in our live area, just make sure we don't have anything vital. Let's go ahead and bring that to the top. And we can even do an opacity on that so we can kind of see how everything's going. Nothing is extending out of the margin. The type is within the margin, so fantastic. Continuing to finesse the headline, I feel like juicy could even afford to be a little bit bigger compared to hot. Didn't want one word to overpower the other. So now it's time to add a little bit of effect here. We need some background effects. We need some effects on our typography. So before we move on to adding effects to the typography, I wanted to do one more tweak to the headline. So I'm selecting all 3 of my main words. I'm going back up to edit, and I'm just going to do another skew. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to type in anything. I'm going to take this top left corner. I'm going to shift it, kind of add a little more of a slant to it, just to add a sense of it moving. So this is what we had before. Okay, so it's straight up and down, still looks great, and just kind of showing you what it looks like after. Just adding even more movement, just went up to skew and just shifted that top left corner just a little bit to skew it even more. So we have this awesome fire photo I found on Pexels.com. What I like about this photo is it has a black background and not a white one, which we're going to be using blending modes to overlay this on the typography. And having a black background always helps with what we're doing here. So I tend to prefer to find fire photos that have a black background if there's another fire photo you want to use for your example. Paste this cool fire photo in. Of course, I'm going to make sure I have smart guides on so I can bring it down and bring it up in size. So we're going to overlay this fire effect over top of hot. And let's zoom in here. We're going to set this to a blending mode. So blending modes will let certain pixels through. And we're going to scroll through this to find the right one. So I believe screen is the one I ended up going with in my example. But just kind of scrolling through to show you how there's different ways we can get this fire effect to really overlay on top of the hot. So it looks like screen is going to be our winner. Let's also size this up, make it a little bit smaller. We don't want to overwhelm the word with too many flames. So here's what we're going to do. We cannot see the T at all, and that's not a good thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our flame layer, let's go ahead and call it flame, and we're going to add a layering mask to this. So just adding a layering mask, and we're going to paint away some of the flames so it doesn't overwhelm and block the T. So let me paint with black. So I've got a brush, soft round, almost always use soft round just because it feathers it better. And we can go in, this is when we can really zoom in and figure out what flames are worth keeping and what flames are just too much. So first of all, I want to be able to read the T. So let's get rid of some of these flames on the T. And same thing for O. Wouldn't it be neat if it looked like the fire came into the O and behind the O on the right side. So if we got rid of this, it'll do just that. It'll look like the flames are coming out of the O. Probably don't need the flames up top either, just cleaning it up. And we don't want it to be too busy, so let's leave the H relatively clear and clean. We can choose to have the flame come over here, but then the flame not be active here. Just going around and hand-picking what I think would be worth keeping. Some of this extra stuff we're not going to need either. Just kind of deleting some of this background stuff. We don't want to have the flames be too overwhelming for our viewer. The burger is not literally on fire, it's just a little spicy. And I still think the T is a bit overwhelmed by the flames. Just clicking twice, so it looks like a part of the flame is going up, and we can always make our brush smaller to have a little bit tighter of a cutout. That's why I love layering masks. And at any time, we can paint with white and bring back our flame. That's what I love about layering masks, is nothing is ever permanent with a layering mask. So I think that looks pretty good. You can of course zoom out. Really great. So now we need juicy. What can describe juicy? When I think of juicy, I think of water. I think of water droplets, and that's exactly why we have these droplets right here. So let's get this photo of droplets and do the same thing we did with juicy, but now we're just doing it with droplets. Let's angle this to get the same angle for our droplets. Press enter. We're going to find a nice blending mode for this, one that really helps those droplets pop out over juicy. Ooh, divide. That looks really good. So we're going to position the dots or the droplets so they're on the type as best as we can. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to mask this photo. So we have juicy, the word juicy right here. We're just going to get the magic wand tool, click outside, and just do an inverse selection. Select, inverse. So now we have just the type selected. We're going to go back to our, and we're just going to click, now that we have the selection, we're going to do a layering mask and clip that. Boom, just like that. So now we can go in, do the same thing, and we can paint on with black and get rid of some droplets we may not need, just to make it a little less busy. Let's sharpen it, because I do feel like it could use a nice sharpening. So just sharpening that layer. We can even sharpen it again, just adding a sharpness. We could probably sharpen up the flame as well. So just going to that flame layer and sharpening it. Same thing with our burger. Can always use a little sharpening. So let's save it. I think our effects are done. And we'll move on to doing some photo treatment to the hamburger next.